Father Thomas Greaves remembered the morning like it had happened yesterday. The sun had barely risen over the small hills of Marrow Creek when the call came. 4 nuns from the Sacred Mercy Convent were missing. The chapel was locked from the inside, breakfast plates, untouched beds neatly made, as if the women had simply stepped out and vanished. No signs of struggle, no broken glass, no screams in the night, just silence. The town gathered quickly, forming search parties fanning out across woods barns, nearby creeks. But by dusk, it was clear. The 4 women were gone, and no one saw a thing. The village of Marrow Creek wasn't used to headlines. The last time a reporter came through was for a record-setting pumpkin in 1972. But within 2 days, national news vans swarmed the gravel roads. Journalists leaned into Father Greaves, asking the same question in different voices. Where did they go? He had no answers, only more questions. Why were all 4 women gone at once? Why no trace? Why no goodbyes? The bishop from the diocese arrived in a dark car, met privately with local officials, and then declared the matter closed. Internal investigation. No foul play, suspected, just 4 souls lost to the wind. And then just like that, the town was told to move on. But not everyone could move on. Sister Agnes had been like a second mother to the altar boys. Sister Claire ran the soup kitchen that fed half the town. The youngest Sister Rose was barely 20. She wrote poems in the margins of Bibles and played piano during evening service. These women weren't strangers. They were the heartbeat of Marrow Creek. Their absence wasn't just unsettling. It felt unnatural, like something had been removed from the air, like a storm had passed. But the trees were still standing. Everyone knew something was wrong. They just didn't know what to say or who to say it to. Father Greaves spent the next weeks and days conducting Mass for half-empty pews, offering comfort without feeling any himself. He kept seeing things in the corner of his vision, movement in the chapel late at night, footsteps in the hallway, but every time he turned, nothing was there. He convinced himself it was grief, exhaustion, maybe even guilt. He had been the last to see the women alive, the last to lock the chapel door, the last to hear them laugh in the rectory kitchen. He prayed for peace, but what he got was silence, that and the lingering question that refused to die. What had he missed? 28 years passed without an answer, until one October morning in 2008, when workers renovating the convent's basement discovered something behind a sealed brick wall. At first it looked like a storage space, broken shelves, old pew parts. But when the dust settled, they saw a staircase descending into earth-stone steps, wet and narrow. The workers called the church. The church called Father Greaves. And when he arrived, flashlight in hand, he knew instantly this wasn't supposed to be here, and whatever lay beneath had been buried on purpose. Father Greaves descended the narrow stone steps, one careful breath at a time. Each footfall echoed as if the walls were listening. The air grew colder with every step, and the dampness clung to his skin like a warning. The flashlight beam shook slightly in his hand, but what he saw at the bottom stopped him completely. A small arched chamber carved from the earth itself. No lights, no altar, no explanation. In the center of the floor was a single wooden chair facing a blank wall. Nothing else, just dirt, stone and silence. The kind of silence that felt arranged, not natural. He stood still for a long time, unable to look away from the chair, as if it might start speaking. That night he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that chamber. Again and again, the chair empty and waiting. Something in the pit of his stomach told him this was more than old architecture. He pulled out the blueprints of the convent, but the space didn't exist officially. No record, no drawings. The church hadn't authorized any underground structure. Not in 1901 when it was built, not during any renovations since. But someone had built it, and whoever did hadn't wanted it found. He went back, the next day alone this time. The workers had cleared out, spooked by the discovery and unwilling to continue without direction. Father Greaves entered the chamber again, flashlight sweeping across the stone. When he leaned in closer to the far wall, he saw something faint etched into the surface at eye level. 4 initials. They weren't visible at first, but once the dirt was brushed away, he saw them clearly. SA, SC, SM, SR, the initials of the 4 missing nuns. He stepped back, heart thudding. Not just because the marks were there, but because below them, someone had scrawled one sentence in shaky carved letters. "Forgive us for what we heard." The next morning, Father Greaves contacted the diocese. They told him to seal the area and await further instruction. But he didn't. He called Dinah Brooks, a journalist he'd met years ago when the parish handled a case of historical abuse. She was sharp, relentless, and not afraid of the church. She drove in that evening, armed with a voice recorder camera and questions. Before she even entered the staircase, she asked one thing. Were they ever declared dead? Father Greaves shook his head. Never. Officially, they're still missing. Dana smiled grimly. Let's change that. They descended the steps together, and Dana immediately began photographing every surface. She noticed the air too, the stillness. She whispered into her recorder. This place isn't abandoned. It's hushed. On the far wall, her flashlight caught a discoloration. She moved in and found something else buried deeper behind, a second layer of stone-etched symbols. Not Latin, not English, but something older, primitive. When she looked back at Father Greaves, he was pale, breathing fast. He whispered, it wasn't just a hiding place. It was a chamber of silence. And now that we've broken it, something has started. The following day, Dana returned to the chamber alone. Father Greaves had been called away, unexpectedly by the bishop, who had gotten word of the excavation. She welcomed the silence, or so she thought, until she began reviewing her recordings from the previous night. Amid the echo of her own voice describing the room, she heard something else. A whisper. Not hers, not Father Greaves. Barely audible a breath. Really, but distinctly shaped like words. Dinah leaned in, replayed it over and over. Then finally she heard it clearly enough to write down one sentence. They are not gone, but beneath. The voice was low, female and broken, but it chilled her to the core. Determined. Dana brought in audio equipment she had borrowed from a podcast producer friend, sensitive enough to pick up distant frequencies. She left it overnight with motion sensors inside the chamber. The next morning when she returned, she found the chair moved slightly angled toward the wall. The audio device was blinking. Over 6 hours of recordings. She listened for hours and found at least 3 separate moments where voices emerged, always female, never screaming, only whispering fragments of prayer lines of psalms and one name repeated over and over again. Charlotte. She searched parish records, but no nun by that name had ever been assigned to Sacred Mercy. Or so it seemed. Meanwhile, Father Greaves sat across from the bishop in a dim room at the diocese headquarters. The bishop's voice was calm but firm. You are not to allow outsiders access to that space. Any discoveries must be turned over immediately. Greaves asked why, but received no answer, only a warning. Do not dig deeper than the faith can cover. He left the office shaken, not just by the bishop's command, but by a feeling he hadn't had in decades that something was being buried again, in real time, not just stone, but truth. He stopped by a church archive on his way home and found a restricted folder tucked inside a cabinet marked Retired Cases. The folder was thin, but inside was a black and white photograph of 5 nuns, not 4. Dana shared the audio with Father Greaves that evening and played the part where the whisper said, they are not gone, but beneath. When she mentioned the name Charlotte, he froze. He pulled the photograph from his bag and pointed to the smallest figure, a girl standing slightly apart from the others. "That's her," he said. "That's Charlotte." But she was never reported missing. Dana asked, "Did she vanish before or after the others?" Father Greaves replied, "I don't think she vanished at all. I think she was erased," Dana whispered. "Then this is bigger than 4 women. This is about what they saw." That night, Father Greaves returned to the chamber alone again, drawn by something he couldn't name. The second he entered the room, the air changed. Not colder, just tighter, as if the walls were listening. He knelt before the initials and prayed softly, not for answers, but for permission. And then, as his whisper faded into the stone, something shifted. A low creaking sound behind the far wall. He turned slowly, flashlight raised. The wall was no longer solid. There was a seam invisible before, but now clearly a hidden door, and etched faintly beside it were the words, "In silence we saw, and in silence we waited." Father Greaves stood frozen in front of the newly revealed seam in the stone. His hand trembled as he brushed away more dust, revealing not just a door, but symbols carved deep into the frame, twisted crosses, circles nested within triangles, and something that resembled an open eye. He hesitated, then pressed against the stone, expecting it to resist. Instead, it moved inward with a low sigh of air. The space beyond was darker than the chamber. A tunnel sloped downward deeper into the earth, lined with rotted wooden beams and the faint smell of old incense, or maybe something fouler. He took one step, then another, whispering a prayer with each one. Somewhere behind him, he swore he heard a footstep, not echoing his own. Dana arrived the next morning after Greaves called her with a single sentence. "I found where they went." She stepped into the chamber, carrying 2 flashlights and a camera, and followed him through the passage. The tunnel twisted, then opened into a small underground room with stone walls and what looked like a writing desk covered in brittle parchment. One candle holder, rusted but intact, stood in the corner. On the wall was a faded drawing, childlike in style. 5 women standing in a circle, one smaller and outlined in red. Above it, someone had written Charlotte in block letters, then crossed it out roughly as if erasing her again. Dana took a photo, then whispered, "Who was she really?" Father Greaves began searching parish records with Dana cross-referencing names of novices postulants and transfers in the years leading up to 1980. Charlotte M. didn't appear anywhere, but they found something else. A string of letters sent from Sacred Mercy to the diocese between 1978 and 1980, all signed by Sister Miriam. Each letter expressed concern about a young girl brought to the convent under special circumstances, one whose presence was not officially documented. The final letter was brief and ominous. "She knows. She saw something. I can no longer contain this. She may speak soon." Greaves folded the letter slowly and said, "The others didn't vanish to escape. They vanished to protect." Back in the tunnel, Dana noticed something strange. A series of marks on the floor, small, almost like chalk lines leading from the hidden door to the corner where a section of wall had clearly been disturbed. She knelt and scraped away the loose earth beneath it. Lay something wrapped in aged cloth. She unwrapped it carefully, revealing a rosary, twisted and broken. And beneath it, a metal pendant etched with a single word, Agnes. She turned to Greaves, who nodded, "Sister Agnes, one of the 4 nuns. But why buried here away from the others? Unless this wasn't a hiding place, but something else." Dana whispered, "Maybe this was Charlotte's cell, not where she hid, but where she was kept." Later that night, Dana sat alone in her motel room, listening to the audio from her earlier recordings. This time, she wasn't listening for words, but for breathing. At the 28-minute mark she heard it again, a voice faint and trembling. I didn't tell, I only listened. Then a pause, then a sob. She replayed it again and again, trying to decipher the tone. Not guilt, not fear, but pain buried deep and long. Then just before the tape cut off, the voice spoke one final time. Please tell them I was good. I didn't deserve the dark. Dana closed her laptop and sat in silence, knowing they were no longer chasing a mystery. They were chasing a memory, trying desperately not to be forgotten. Father Greaves stood before the altar of Sacred Mercy Chapel, just before dawn, the air still thick with incense from the midnight vigil. The church was empty, but felt heavier than full pews ever did. He stared at the stained glass window above the altar, where 4 saints were depicted in vivid colour. He'd seen them 1,000 times, but now noticed something that chilled him. The 5th pane, once part of the window, was patched with plain frosted glass, as if something had been removed or erased. He climbed up using the maintenance ladder and gently peeled back the border. At the edge, barely visible, was a faded inscription, CM. It was never a saint, he whispered. It was Charlotte Matthews. Her name had been hidden in plain sight. Dana returned to the chamber with a plan. She brought with her a ground-penetrating scanner borrowed from a university team working nearby. With the help of a friend, she scanned the floors and walls of the chamber and tunnel. The results revealed 2 startling discoveries. First, a hidden cavity beneath the tunnel floor, directly under the spot where Sister Agnes's pendant had been found. Second, an offshoot chamber behind the main stone wall that no current blueprint accounted for. Dana looked at the scan, then at Father Greaves and said, she wasn't alone down here. They excavated the lower space carefully with hand tools and brushes, uncovering what appeared to be a sealed wooden box, aged by decades of moisture. Dana opened it slowly. Inside were several objects, a torn veil, a child's rosary, a stack of prayer cards, and a small leather-bound notebook. She opened it, and the first page read, Property of Sister Charlotte. I write what I cannot say. Each entry that followed was haunting fragments of sentences, broken prayers, and one recurring phrase over and over again. They listened through stone. The last entry was dated 1 day before the others vanished. It read, I heard them whisper beneath. I saw their faces turn. As Dana read aloud, Father Greaves sat on the cold floor, hands folded. His thoughts were racing back to his first year at the convent. He had seen a young girl once in the hallway, someone who didn't wear a full habit, who never spoke. He remembered asking Sister Claire who she was and being told sharply, she's not your concern. He hadn't thought about that moment in decades, but now it came flooding back. The girl's eyes wide, her lips moving, but no sound. Greaves whispered to himself, she wasn't a nun, she was a witness. And we left her down here that evening. A storm rolled in over Marrow Creek. Lightning splintered across the sky as Father Greaves stood outside the chapel soaked to the bone. The door behind him opened and Dana stepped out holding the notebook. It wasn't just about Charlotte, she said. They all knew. They all heard something that made them disappear. And now we've disturbed it. Greaves looked out over the graveyard as a wind howled between the headstones. They're not finished, he said. Not until someone hears them, the way she did. 3 days later, Dana and Father Greaves returned to the excavation site, now fully exposed. A second hidden chamber had been confirmed and carefully opened. This room was unlike the others. It was circular. The walls completely smooth, the air unnaturally still. And when Dana tested her voice inside, something horrifying happened. Her words didn't bounce back. The room had no echo at all. It swallowed sound like a vacuum. Dana clapped her hands once, then twice. Nothing. No reverberation. No reflection. Just dead space. She looked at Greaves. This isn't architecture. This is intentional. Greaves nodded. And whatever they heard in here wasn't meant to leave. Inside the chamber, they found symbols carved deep into the floor, a spiral surrounded by 13 small crosses, 4 of them darker, as if stained. Dana knelt down, tracing the lines with her hand, then paused. One of the crosses had initials beneath it. CM, the only one marked by name. She whispered. She wasn't just here. She was part of whatever this was. Then she found a shallow indentation in the floor, shaped like a human form, arms by the side legs together. The outline was too small for an adult. Dana stood up quickly. Someone had lain here for a very long time. Later that night, Father Greaves sat in his office, flipping through old mass logs from 1979 and 1980. Looking for anything out of place, he found an entry written, in a different hand than his own, a single word scribbled beside the Feast of St. Joseph's Silence. It wasn't a hymn or ritual. It was listed as the theme for that day's service, but Greaves never remembered celebrating it that way. He checked who signed that entry, Sister Miriam. The same woman who had written the last warning in the letters. The same one who vanished last. She knew, Greaves whispered. She marked it in plain sight, but no one ever read it. Dana returned to her motel and listened to the static heavy audio recordings from the echo-less room. One section made her skin crawl. It wasn't speech, it wasn't music. It was rhythmic, almost like chanting buried beneath layers of silence. As she enhanced the sound with software, she heard a pattern in the noise. 13 words repeated slowly, one for each cross. Then the chant stopped abruptly, followed by one final word in a broken female voice. Enough. The voice cracked on the last syllable, then faded completely. Dana turned off the recording, sat in the dark, and realized something terrifying. The voices weren't trapped. The silence had been holding them back. The next morning, as the town prepared for Sunday Mass, Father Greaves walked into the chapel early and found the altar candles lit, though no one had entered. The air was cold and heavy, and as he approached the front pew, he saw something carved into the wood, a spiral freshly scratched as if by fingernail. He knelt and placed his palm over it, whispering a psalm without thinking. Then he heard it clearly, for the first time since 1980. A whisper, not outside, but from within. The chapel walls, 4 voices overlapping, layered and low. Forgive me, she begged us to speak. We stayed quiet and now we are part of it. Greaves opened his eyes slowly and said aloud, Not anymore. Dana paced the church archive, her arms full of brittle parish ledgers, baptism records, and novice entry logs. She wasn't looking for facts. She was looking for absence. Names that once existed and then vanished. After hours of cross-referencing, she noticed a pattern. Over a 6-year period, more than a dozen women had entered Sacred Mercy as postulants. Only 5 were ever recorded as leaving. The others didn't die. They didn't transfer. They just disappeared. Dana made a list. 12 names. 11 of them lined up with the birth registries from nearby parishes. 1 didn't. Charlotte Matthews. No birth certificate, no family parish. She had come from nowhere, or from somewhere no one wanted documented. Dana underlined her name twice. Not lost, not missing, erased. Father Greaves visited Sister Ellen, a retired nun who once served at Sacred Mercy in the late 1970s. Now in hospice care, her memory frayed by time, she barely opened her eyes. But when he showed her Charlotte's photograph, her hand clenched around the bedsheet. She wasn't supposed to see, Ellen whispered. They told us she wouldn't remember. Greaves leaned in. Remember what? She said nothing more. Just began reciting Hail Marys, each one faster than the last. Her voice cracked at the final words. Pray for us sinners, now and at the hour. Then silence. That night, Dana reviewed the prayer cards found in the underground box. Most were common: St. Francis, St. Rory, Cecilia, traditional Catholic symbols, but one stood out. A homemade card with a drawing of 5 crosses, the middle one burning. On the back, a single sentence: "He watches through the silence." Dana stared at it for minutes, then flipped open her notebook. There was something ritualistic about what had happened beneath the convent, something that had been reenacted before. She whispered, "Charlotte didn't find a secret. She survived a ceremony." Then the floorboard beneath her chair creaked. In the morning, someone left a brown envelope at the chapel steps. No name, no return address. Inside were 3 photographs, each faded with age. All showed the same basement chamber. In the background of one image, Charlotte was visible, tied to the chair, eyes wide, mouth taped shut. But in the final photo, she was gone. The chair was empty. Yet something else had appeared in the image's far corner. A dark figure barely visible, hands pressed to the stone, as if trying to get out. Dana showed the images to Greaves. He said nothing. He simply crossed himself and whispered, "We didn't bury their bodies. We buried their names." Word of the chamber had begun to spread. Someone leaked parts of Dana's article in progress. Locals who once called her outsider now whispered questions in diners and hardware stores. A few older parishioners came forward, vague recollections of girls who had stayed at the convent briefly, of screams late at night, of confessions that were never absolved. A janitor recalled cleaning blood from the back pew in 1980. A farmer remembered selling crates of bricks to a man from the diocese. Dana collected every account, every fracture in the silence, every name they buried, she wrote down. And when she finished the list, she whispered, "We're bringing them back, one by one." The old crucifix in the convent's rear chapel had hung undisturbed for nearly a century. Heavy wooden beams nailed into stone long before anyone could remember who placed it there. Dana stood before it now, after noticing something strange in an archival photo from 1968. The cross looked different, not in shape, but in position slightly shifted to the left. She returned to the chapel, flashlight in hand, and carefully examined the base. Her fingers brushed a crack in the wall behind it. When Father Greaves arrived, she said, "It's not just decoration, it's a seal." Together, they pulled the crucifix away, and behind it found an indentation filled with packed black dust, and beneath that, a scorched metal plate etched with Latin "Father Greaves," translated aloud. In death, they returned to keep the silence, and below that, another name scratched in newer hand, Charlotte Matthews. That night, Dana placed the scorched plate on the rectory table and began researching the Latin phrasing. It wasn't a biblical verse, not from Scripture or any Catholic rite, but matched patterns in texts she found only through obscure academic papers on suppressed religious cults. One in particular stood out, a 19th century order excommunicated by the Vatican for practicing ritual isolation in silence. Their belief was that by removing a person's voice and memory, they could remove sin entirely. They called it the offering of ash and silence. Dana stared at the words and whispered, "They weren't hiding her. They were sacrificing her." Father Greaves returned to Sister Ellen's hospice room just before midnight, holding the scorched plate in his hands. When she saw it, her lips moved slowly, forming words with great effort. Ash they gave her, ash to swallow, and locked her beneath. She tried to scream, but stone eats the sound. Greaves knelt beside her, eyes wide. She looked at him for the last time and said, "We were told it was mercy." Then she exhaled one long breath and was gone. Her rosary slipped from her hand and landed on the floor in perfect silence. Dana published her first article the next day. It went live at 7 a.m. and by noon, the diocese issued a public statement denying any knowledge of the chamber or any prior accusations. Father Greaves was asked to step down temporarily while an internal review took place. Reporters swarmed Marrow Creek again, this time more aggressive than before. But the townspeople had changed. They remembered faces, names, smells they'd buried out of fear. One woman came forward claiming her sister had vanished after a summer at the convent in 1975. No records, no answers. Only an envelope of money and a letter saying she had entered spiritual seclusion. Dana added her name to the list. That evening, a fire broke out in the chapel where the sealed plate had been stored. Flames consumed the altar, the pews. The stone cracked from the heat. But one thing remained untouched. When the fire crew entered, they found the scorched metal plate lying in the center of the floor, unburnt, surrounded by black ash, arranged in a perfect spiral. Dana arrived just after sunrise, stood in the center of the ruined chapel and said softly, "This isn't over. It's waking up." The night after the fire, Dana stayed in the church rectory alone, the storm outside battering the stained glass with waves of wind. The scorched plate lay on the table before her, surrounded by every name she'd written down, every timeline, every photo of the underground chambers. She stared at the spiral drawn in ash from the chapel floor and felt something shift in the room. Not the temperature, not the sound. Something in the walls. A pressure, like the church was breathing for the first time in decades. Then came the whisper, soft but deliberate, repeated again and again in the corners of the rectory. "Charlotte, Charlotte, Charlotte." Father Greaves had gone silent since the bishop's order to withdraw from public comment. But that morning he called Dana and said, "Come to the bell tower now." She climbed the steps and found him standing beside the old bell, its clapper still wrapped in cloth as it had been since 1980. Greaves said, "I didn't know this until last night." But the tower was silenced the morning after they disappeared. Dana stared at him. "You think the bell heard something?" Greaves unwrapped the clapper and rang it once. The sound echoed down into the village, and from somewhere deep beneath the chapel, they heard something answer. One single knock against stone. Later that day, Dana visited the chamber again, alone this time. She descended slowly, her flashlight flickering, and paused at the threshold. She spoke aloud deliberately. "My name is Dana Brooks. I'm not here to erase. I'm here to remember." The walls didn't respond at first, but as she stepped fully inside, the silence broke just slightly. She felt it in her chest, more than heard it. A low hum, a vibration. Then the voice of a girl, maybe 11, maybe 12, soft and afraid. "They made me kneel. They told me I was the last." Then the voice faded. Dana wrote every word on her forearm so she wouldn't forget. Before reaching the recorder, she wasn't just collecting evidence now. She was bearing witness. The bishop released an official statement that evening, denying all claims linking the diocese to the underground structure or the names unearthed by Dana's reporting. But people stopped believing him. Anonymous sources within the church began leaking documents, blueprints of pre-sanctuary extensions, handwritten instructions on containment by sacrament, and most damning of all, a note from 1980, addressed to the bishop at the time. It read simply, "The girl has heard too much. The sisters are prepared to proceed in silence forever." Dana included it in her next article under the headline, "The walls are speaking and we ignored them." At midnight, a group of townspeople stood quietly outside the burned chapel, each holding a candle. Some were descendants of those who once worked at the convent. Others were simply there because the silence had become too loud. Dana stood with them watching as Father Greaves stepped forward and rang the bell a second time. The sound rang out high and clear, and from the shadows behind the altar, something moved. Not a figure, not a ghost, but a draught of warm air as if the chapel exhaled. Dana turned to Greaves and said, "The final chapter isn't ours to write. It belongs to them, and tomorrow we bring their names into the light." At sunrise, the chapel doors opened not to mass, but to testimony. A town that had once closed its mouth now opened its eyes. Rows of pews filled with faces both old and new. Reporters stood alongside farmers. School teachers sat beside survivors. Dana stood at the pulpit holding a single worn notebook, the one Charlotte had started and others had filled. Each page bore names, dates, fragments of fear turned into memory. Dana spoke slowly, clearly. "Today, we do not accuse. We acknowledge today. The church does not speak. The silence does." Father Greaves stepped forward next, holding a list of names, each one cross-referenced, researched, traced and verified. 12 women who entered the convent between 1974 and 1980. 12 who never left officially. 4 who were known. 8 who had been erased. He read them aloud one by one, and with each name, a candle was lit until the altar glowed, not in mourning, but in recognition. When he reached the final name, he paused longer than the rest. Charlotte Matthews. Her candle burned the brightest. The diocese sent representatives that morning. They didn't speak. They observed. They stood in the back of the chapel and listened as townspeople took turns, reading aloud letters, long hidden testimonies, handwritten by mothers, aunts, friends of the missing. No one shouted. No one cried. The pain had calcified into clarity. And when Dana played the final audio clip, the voice whispering, "I didn't deserve the dark," many lowered their heads, not in shame, but in reverence, for a girl who waited in silence and was finally heard. Weeks later, the site beneath Sacred Mercy was officially sealed, not in secrecy, but in stone. A memorial was built above it, a circular path lined with the names recovered, etched into dark glass surrounded by white lilies. Dana visited it alone one evening, placed a folded note inside the stone and whispered, "This time they'll remember." Then she turned and walked away, not with sorrow, but with resolve. She had told their story, but it belonged to everyone now. That fall, a new sound rang from the chapel bell tower. Not the old toll of duty, but a new one. Every day at noon, the bell rang 13 times, once for each of the missing and once for those who stayed silent. The children in the village would pause and count them aloud, some with understanding, some simply out of habit. And over time, the silence that once haunted Marrow Creek became something else entirely. Not a void, but a memory, with shape and name and voice. A silence that rose not to bury, but to testify.